Hello, good evening. Well, Donald Trump made it pretty clear, months before he won the election, that one of his top priorities was going to be ending the war in Ukraine, and quickly. But over the last few days, we've heard an awful lot of analysis and opinion about the nature of the talks. Should they be happening in this way? Should they be happening at all? And people have different opinions on the compromises that might need to be made in order to stop the fighting and the best way of ensuring a peace that lasts. In journalism, it's important to reflect both sides of an argument, to listen, to try and understand nuance and different perspectives, to be aware of your own bias. But it's also important to call out and state the facts and to call out facts that are simply untrue. So with that in mind, I just want you to listen to what Donald Trump said at a press conference in Florida last night.
If we win, I'll get that thing settled before I take the office. I'll get it settled as president-elect. I'll get that war stopped.
That wasn't the press conference last night. This is a press conference in Florida last night.
I think I have the power to end this war, and I think it's going very well. But today I heard, oh, well, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal. I could have made a deal for Ukraine that would have given them almost all of the land, everything, almost all of the land, and no people would have been killed, and no city would have been demolished, and not one dome would have been knocked down. But they chose not to do it that way.
You should never have started it. Ukraine should never have started it. Now, that is not true, and it should be called out. On the 24th of February 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. Their army attacked from Belarus, from Russia and Crimea that they previously annexed. Facts matter. We have a responsibility to be clear when something is not true. So what is actually going on? Well, according to Boris Johnson, Europeans should stop being scandalised by Donald Trump. And actually, Donald Trump's statements, he says, are not intended to be historically accurate, but to shock Europeans into action. So is this all a negotiating tactic from the US president? It's certainly possible. Some would agree with Donald Trump that Europe needs to step up. But, you know, despite all of that, facts always matter, and this one matters more than most, because it seems to me if you're trying to end a war, firstly, you need to face up to the truth of how it actually started. Well, tonight, relations between Donald Trump and President Zelenskyy appear to have got worse, with Donald Trump going on his Truth social platform to call him a dictator. From Kyiv, here's our defence and security editor, Deborah Haynes.
Even as Washington and Moscow talk peace, Ukraine is pummeled by Russia's war. A civilian energy site ablaze after a drone strike in the port city of Odessa. But enemy fire is no longer the only threat, as Donald Trump unleashed an extraordinary attack against Ukraine's president. Posting on social media, he called Volodymyr Zelenskyy a dictator who refuses to hold elections and warned him he'd better move fast or he's not going to have a country left. I love Ukraine, but Zelenskyy has done a terrible job. His country is shattered and millions have unnecessarily died. The outburst came after Mr. Zelenskyy responded to an earlier verbal battering, including a false claim he only has a 4% approval rating.
We understand where it's coming from. Russia. And we have evidence that these figures are being discussed between the US and Russia. Unfortunately, President Trump, whom we deeply respect as the leader of a nation we highly value, is also caught in this disinformation space. I would like to see more truth from Trump's team.
One hope is the arrival of this man to Kyiv.
Good morning, y'all. How you doing today?
Keith Kellogg is the US envoy to Ukraine, here for talks with Mr. Zelenskyy.
We're going to listen. We understand the need for security guarantees. It was very clear to us the importance of sovereignty of this nation and the independence of this nation as well. And part of my mission is to sit and listen and say, okay, what are your concerns? Where are we at? So we can go back to the United States, talk to President Trump and with Secretary Rubio and the rest of the team, and just ensure that we get this one right.
Warm words, but they'll do little to calm the fears triggered by the broadside from his boss. Ukraine's president clearly felt he had no choice but to speak out, given the growing criticism from Washington. But it's a high-risk move, given his reliance on US military support, the premium Donald Trump places on loyalty, and the fact that any friction between the US and Ukraine only plays into one person's hands, and that's Vladimir Putin's. Russia's leader is already enjoying a rekindling of relations and could soon hold talks with President Trump in person.
We have a desire to hold such a meeting, and I would like to hold this meeting. But I repeat once again, it needs to be prepared so that it brings a result.
A chilling prospect for Ukraine. But this country hasn't yet given up hope. It has little left to cling to. Deborah Haynes, Sky News, Kyiv.
Back here, Keir Starmer is under some pressure to condemn those comments from Donald Trump. We'll get more from our chief political correspondent, John Craig, on that in just a moment. But first, let's cross to Washington and speak to our US correspondent, James Matthews. Things are moving so quickly in Washington. I think the simple questions are probably best to you. What is the latest?
Well, that's right, Sophie. Yeah, diplomacy by social media, and it is a dark diplomacy taking us, I think, to a dark place, at least, because nobody knows quite where the route out of this is and where it will take the United States and everybody else. I'm in the Russell building right now, the bowels of what is an office complex for senators and representatives, Congress people. There's been a meeting with the Vice President, J.D. Vance, a lunch meeting. I suppose a briefing about where he is, where the president is, and the thinking at the top. I have to say the thinking at the top seems very much in keeping with what it was yesterday. J.D. Vance has said this to the Daily Mail so far, talking about Zelenskyy. Said this morning. The idea Zelenskyy is going to change the president's mind by bad-mouthing him in public. Everybody knows the president will tell you that's an atrocious way to deal with this administration. That's after Zelenskyy said that Donald Trump was living in a disinformation space. In response to that, Donald Trump went on Truth Social and called Zelenskyy a dictator, said he better move fast or he wouldn't have a country anymore. So that's the tenor of discussions right now, which will worry Ukraine clearly, but also worry European allies. Trump said in his posting, we're successfully negotiating an end to the war, something all admit only Trump and the Trump administration can do. He went on to say Europe has failed to bring peace, distancing himself from European peace efforts thus far. And of course what that does is to entrench a situation where you have, on the one side, Ukrainian/European peace efforts and a vision of the road ahead, and on the other side, the United States vision of where things go, and that is increasingly aligned to what we have heard from Russia. Keir Starmer is coming out here next week, so is Emmanuel Macron. That's news broken in the past hour, Sophie. Clearly a critical meeting, but it will worry them. The chief concern is what is the starting point for such a meeting? Because what we've heard from Donald Trump today, and you alluded to it in your opener, what he has had to say has been fact-checked beyond credibility, certainly beyond the understanding and the positions of Starmer and Macron. So where do discussions start next week with Donald Trump, and where does trust start with a US president increasingly seen to be siding, aligning himself with Vladimir Putin and parroting what we hear from Moscow about the Ukraine conflict?
Thank you very much indeed. James Matthews reporting there for us from the States. Now, let's bring in our chief political correspondent, John Craig, shall we? James there was talking about a dark diplomacy taking us to a dark place. We've got, of course, that meeting with Keir Starmer going into to the United States next week. But how are politicians here reacting to it?
Well, there are signs that the broad political consensus that we've had going back to when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister and the invasion happened, starting to fray a bit, because the tone of some of our leading politicians is getting a bit fractious tonight. And it's really, I think, that latest intervention from Donald Trump, the dictator jibe against President Zelenskyy, well, that appears to have goaded Kemi Badenoch, who's been pretty silent on the whole Ukraine issue so far, into speaking out. She's broken her silence. You mentioned Boris Johnson at the start of the programme with his remarkable state when he said Trump's statements are not intended to be historically accurate, but to shock Europeans into action. Now, he actually did come up with a sensible suggestion, unfreezing Russian assets, frozen assets. But it's taken the latest statement from President Trump for Kemi Badenoch to speak out. And she said this: President Zelenskyy is not a dictator. He's the democratically elected leader of Ukraine who bravely stood up to Putin's illegal invasion. Under my leadership and under successive Conservative prime ministers, we have and always will stand with Ukraine. Now, that hasn't stopped some of the Tories' political opponents, notably Sir Ed Davey, hitting out. I mean, in a really outspoken attack earlier, he called Reform UK and, in fact, some Tories Trump bootlickers. And in response to the latest Kemi Badenoch tweet or the Donald Trump's latest remarks, he said, and this is Ed Davey, the Lib Dem leader, calling Zelenskyy a dictator must be where the line is drawn. It's my sincere hope that the whole political spectrum in the United Kingdom will speak with one voice in opposition to Trump's lies. Now, the reason I say that the consensus seems to be getting a bit slightly frayed is that Kemi Badenoch also was criticising Sir Keir Starmer, really, talking about this argument about increasing defence spending to 2.5% of income. That's sitting on his desk, she said. That should be the bare minimum. Starmer should get on with it, get on a plane to Washington, show some leadership. Well, of course, he's getting on a plane to Washington. We can't afford to get this wrong. And in the last few minutes, we've had James Cleverly, the former Tory Foreign Secretary, who's criticised David Lammy, saying that the Trump remarks, he says that the USA is a friend, but we must be honest and courageous when we disagree. President Trump is wrong about Zelenskyy, Ukraine. The Foreign Secretary should say so. His silence is deafening. So they're starting to bicker amongst themselves. You think back to exchanges, going back to when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister, Keir Starmer was leading up, and Rishi Sunak was Prime Minister. There was really just one voice in Parliament, wasn't there? But they're bickering like mad tonight.
It does show, doesn't it, how fractious and sort of febrile the situation really is. John, thank you very much indeed. John Craig there. Now, the war in Ukraine is sure to feature in tomorrow's papers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the Times chief political correspondent, that's Aubrey Allegretti, and the Daily Mail's Whitehall editor, Claire Ellicott. Right, let's bring in our duo for this evening, shall we? The former Conservative Minister Tom Pursglove and the social issues campaigner Kwejo Twiniboa. Great to have you both with us today. It feels like we're just at the minute on a kind of roller coaster of diplomacy, and it's really, really unclear where we're going to end up. Tom, what's your reaction to the latest from what we've heard from America? Because we have seen people coming out and saying it's unacceptable.
I agree with that interpretation. I think this is something where the facts speak for themselves. There is only one aggressor in this situation. It is President Putin and Russia, who invaded a sovereign state who has every right to defend itself. I think, as Boris described it, it is a bit like saying, in terms of historic comparison, that the United States attacked Japan at Pearl Harbor. That is an absurd statement. And I think we just need to call this out for what it is. I do think there is something in saying that President Trump is seeking to try and provoke. I think he is frustrated about the fact that Europe hasn't necessarily gripped this. We've been warned for a very long time by the United States about defence spending, and I think what he's trying to do is to try and really spark some action from European allies.
Kwejo, what's your sort of take on all of this? I know you're not like, someone who's kind of deep in what's happening with the Ukraine war, but you're certainly someone who thinks an awful lot about issues, social issues and online disinformation and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I was shocked when I read that statement this evening. It certainly turned from a war to a war of words between Zelenskyy And Trump, I think it completely undermines Zelensky's leadership and credibility as a leader, which I think is the wrong thing to do in this situation. Not only does it risk putting or isolating Ukraine even further, but it causes massive problems for the rest of Europe and European leaders, because now they have to ask themselves the question, do they fall into line behind Trump and his rhetoric, or do they unite even further in standing behind Ukraine and supporting them when they need it most? But ultimately, it's not about it being a war of words, and it shouldn't turn into that because people are dying.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point, isn't it? It does almost have a challenge to European leaders. What do they do? And world leaders too. And Keir Starmer, of course, he's got to decide pretty quickly. He's on a flight out to meet Donald Trump next week. What do you think Keir Starmer should do? Because, look, we have seen people, including Keir Starmer, call this out. Is it more difficult for the Prime Minister, given that he's trying to dance this kind of diplomatic dance with Donald Trump, or should he just call it out?
I think it is tricky for the Prime Minister. I think it's tricky for the government, but I do think that they should call this out. And I also actually think that the UK political system and political parties should speak with one voice on this. I think it isn't helpful to see different leaders of different parties fragmenting off, saying different things. I think that we have a duty and a responsibility in the circumstances to put all of that political knockabout to one side, to try and work very collaboratively together to get to the right solution. I don't disagree with anything that the Prime Minister has said in relation to this over the last few days, and I would hope that my former colleagues who are still in Parliament would want to work constructively with those in government, as well as those in any party. I don't think name-calling, for example, by Ed Davies today has done anything to help that along. We've got to focus on what really matters here, because, as you say, people have lost their lives in a most terrible conflict, and I think we have a duty to support the Ukrainians.
Yeah, and look, everyone will agree they want to see an end to this war, but they want it ended in the right way. I think the comments that Donald Trump has obviously made is the wrong way to go about it. I mean, I remember reading a comment this evening where someone compared it to the Second World War and imagining Roosevelt, for example, coming out and, well, essentially slagging off Winston Churchill during the Second World War. It's completely unimaginable, and the fact that it's happening now when Ukraine need as much support as possible, I think, has to be the focus.
Thank you both very much indeed. Really good to talk to you about this evening. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up. Inflation rises to a level not seen in nearly a year, with higher airfares helping to drive a large jump in UK price rises. Sky News speaks to Anasawa and asks him whether he thinks the government's performance since the general election has harmed Scottish Labour in the polls.
Paris reverberated to the sights, sounds and smells of conflict. There's a focal point to all this anger, and that is Emmanuel Macron.
I'm Adam Parsons, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels.
There are dozens of people desperately clambering to get onto that boat. It is a chaotic scene, but it's being watched by dozens of French police officers on the beach.
I've reported on migration across Europe, close up on the ground, understanding that sense of desperation and meeting the criminal gangs behind it.
This old fishing boat set off from the Libyan port of Tobruk. There were 606 people who were on board.
So we've been distributing life jackets to all the people on board this boat, and now the first person is coming on board.
This is the ugly side of Italian football.
In Italy, everything is really organized.
Football's problems with hooliganism, racism were just dormant, and now they're back and they're getting worse. We cover so many countries, languages and cultures and work hard to gain trust to bring you the full story first.
Help is slowly reaching these places.
It's not just homes, but whole streets like this one that have been reduced to rubble and dust.
This is a picture of destruction.
Everywhere you look in this mountaintop community, there is absolute devastation.
These are the settlers in waiting, keen to start a new life, to annex Gaza for Israel.
The least we can do is just kick them out of our land.
Gaza, which is just 2 miles in that direction, is under attack again. Getting the chance to tell people's stories, it's a privilege.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
A police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
No more seconds.
Hello, welcome back. Sorry, there you are. Need to pay attention. Now, there was some bad news for the Chancellor today and the rest of us after a sharp rise in inflation. To blame a bigger than expected surge in airfares, more expensive food and the VAT rise on private school fees. Our business and economics correspondent, Gurpreet Narwan, has this report.
Inflation. It's back on an unpredictable path, with food, airfares and VAT on private schools driving the measure higher. And parents at this Stay and Play cafe in Harrogate are worried.
The mortgage is up for renewal next year and it's just, everything's so expensive, isn't it? So it is a worry. Obviously with the 2 children, they're very expensive.
Some more pain from them. My 2 younger children are going to have a very different experience than my older children because we used to be able to take them out on days out. We can't do that with the younger 2.
Hannah, the owner here, hasn't paid herself a wage for the last 18 months.
The only way that we can survive is obviously by putting the prices up, but then it puts the customers off coming and, well, they can't afford to come. So, yeah, it's a bit of a catch-22 situation.
But inflation will climb even higher. It's expected to hit 3.7% later this year because of higher energy prices. Policymakers, however, are sanguine. Right now, they are more worried about weak growth. The Bank of England is confident that inflation will eventually come back down to target. It means that policymakers will continue cutting interest rates this year, even as the headline rate of inflation rises. They're going to have to hold their nerve. If the last few years have taught us anything, it's that inflation can be an unpredictable beast. And if it stays high while growth stalls, well, that's not a place the Chancellor wants to be. Businesses say she's not helping the cause by ramping up employers' national insurance contributions.
We're talking about 1.2 million for Wetherspoon a week.
A week?
Yes, it's a lot, and it's more for pubs and hospitality than for supermarkets because we've got more labour costs per pint.
Wetherspoon's pre-tax profits jumped to £74 million last year, but smaller businesses are less well insulated.
Beef has gone up ×4 over the last 15 years.
Paul Kendall runs Kendall's Farm Butchers in Pateley Bridge.
I feel now you have to just be careful with how you're going to expand. I've thought about doing a deli and expanding the range, but just at the moment I'm sitting on my hands and just seeing how this plays out. So instead of going for the growth, more protection of what we've got.
High inflation might end up being a bump in the road, but businesses and customers fear it will be a long journey back to brighter economic prospects. Gurpreet Narwan, Sky News.
Now, last year, Scottish Labour leader Anna Sarwar was a point ahead of the SNP in the polls on course to form the next Scottish government. But after July's general election and Keir Starmer coming to power, things have changed and he's seen a dramatic change in fortunes. He found himself 17 points behind last month, battling for second place. Our Scotland correspondent Conor Gillies has sat down with him.
There's no secret there have been challenges in the last 7 months, but there hasn't really been a focus on what the choice is in May 2026.
But
And
that
fundamental choice in 2026 is going to be more decline, more incompetence with the SNP.
Is part of the issue, though, that Keir Starmer won the election last year, and that has put a hammer blow to your chances of winning next year. That's the truth, isn't it?
Look, but again, I think we've got to look at it in context. I genuinely do not believe there is any route or was any route for a Scottish Labour success in 2026 unless we got rid of the Tories, we elected a UK Labour government and elected Keir Starmer as our Prime Minister.
But the polls have said that you were going to win, and now you're not.
And I've been really open with Keir in private and in public that my objective, my plan, of course, was to help get rid of the Tories, of course was to help elect a UK Labour government, but my ambition was to use the general election as a stepping stone to electing a Scottish Labour government here in 2026, and I'm still confident that is exactly what will happen. Are there challenges? Of course, but I've had many a challenge over the 4 years where, again, I emphasise, people were questioning whether we were going to survive, and I've got no doubt that we have challenges in the coming months, but I'm absolutely confident in our alternative offer.
The polls suggest that's not going to happen. Are you...
Well, the polls suggested that wasn't going to happen months out from the general election, and we did.
The context is different, though, isn't it now?
The polls suggested it was going to happen months before council elections, and it didn't. The polls suggested that over the last 4 years, and I have proven the pollsters and the pundits and the commentators wrong many times over the last 4 years, and I'm confident that we'll prove them wrong again and win that election in 2026.
Let's be frank, though. Are you annoyed at Keir Starmer's first 6 months and the potential dent that that has put in your progress here in Scotland? You know, it doesn't take much to work out that there have been challenges that you recognise.
But Conor, I would accept the frame of that question if I believed that we didn't have a Prime Minister who feels agitated about delivering for the people of this country every single day. If we didn't have someone... Keir Starmer is agitated every single day.
To your detriment?
To turn the country around. No, for the opposite. Actually, to turn the country around and to deliver for every part of the country, especially here in Scotland.
But you know fine well, do you not, that if you had lost last year, then you would not be having the difficulties that you're having now, and that you would likely be Scotland's next First Minister. But Keir Starmer has harmed your chances.
I honestly believe that there is no world in which Scottish Labour could win in 2026 if the Tories had been re-elected again.
Do you, though, accept the premise of my question that Keir Starmer winning last year and the decisions that he has made since, including the winter fuel payment, the treatment of WASPy women, has harmed your chances, has harmed your progress towards winning next year here in Scotland?
I repeat that Keir Starmer and I have a close personal relationship, we have a close political relationship, and we both recognise that actually our success is in many ways intertwined. Have there been challenges? Of course, government isn't easy. Difficult decisions do have to be made.
But those challenges have created difficulty for you in Scotland. Is that fair?
But what I challenge back, Conor, is
is that true?
For all the challenges that people may portray coming from a UK Labour government, what about the challenges that are being faced by almost 20 years of a failing SNP government?
That's Anna Sarwar there speaking to Conor Gillies. Coming up next on the Politics Hub. The actress and campaigner Sophie Winkleman tells me there's a contagion of technology in schools that's damaging our children. My full interview with her up next. Hello, welcome back. Now, the debate around children and smartphones and kids and social media is one that we're very familiar with, but some parents are increasingly concerned about tech in schools and the impact of screens in the classroom. One of those worried parents is someone you might be familiar with, the actress Sophie Winkleman. She's been speaking at the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship conference. She also spoke to me this afternoon. Thank you so much for being on the programme. It's great to speak to you. I mean, you're obviously an actress, you're also a mother, you're someone who has often worked with children and children's charities throughout your life, and you're increasingly worried about what you describe as the digital destruction of childhood. What is it that you mean by that?
I mean an onslaught of screens from every possible angle. Children are getting phones too young, they're being given iPads to subdue them when they're very little, and now I'm increasingly worried about the tech provision in nurseries, primary schools and senior schools.
You're worried about the impact of it, clearly, and there is data to back up what you're saying as well. A quarter of children under 7 have a smartphone. What is it doing to our children then?
It's making them artificially stimulated, and it's making them not able to regulate themselves. It's making them very agitated and sort of numb. It's a really bad combination. Screens do something very strange to a child's brain. It caffeinates them and zombifies them.
It's like two things at the same time.
Two bad things at the same time. And I think it's very sad when I see very young children out and about just given an iPad when they'd be perfectly happy looking at people and dogs and shop windows and, you know, bus drivers, and they'd be perfectly stimulated by this real analogue world, yet we've chosen to digitally pacify them, and I think it's very dangerous.
You are particularly worried about what you describe as EdTech. So what is EdTech, firstly?
EdTech is a sort of form of education which we've embraced with very open arms without proof that it's really very helpful for children in the classroom setting. And I'm finding out very extraordinary information that it's really hampering children's learning. As I say, I think screens are not helpful for children's brains. And I'm working with Jonathan Haidt quite closely on all sorts of clinical research which is coming out, that children learn much better reading from an actual book and writing with a pencil. The learning is much deeper.
It's interesting because I feel like people who don't have kids at school age at the minute might not really be that aware of how much tech there is in the classroom, whether it's in the classroom itself, computing lessons or whatever, but also homework being done on apps or on Google Classroom. I mean, it is a really big thing, isn't it?
It's a really big thing, and I'm pro-tech. Tech's brilliant and fascinating. I think it should be moderately used. I think it should be used in IT lessons, of course. Children should be digitally literate, but there's a difference between being literate and dependent and damaged by it. And I think there's a problem we're facing in Britain in that all exams might go online, GCSEs and A-levels, by 2030. And I think it's something parents should know about. And it is something parents are aware of because they see their children stressing out in front of these screens for homework. They're in front of interactive smart boards in the classroom, which I'm not keen on. I don't think they're a good learning tool. I think a teacher writing something out on a whiteboard's much more effective. And I'm worried about the lack of humanity in education at the moment.
Are you worried about it from a data protection angle as well?
As well, definitely. Because I think a lot of EdTech is not transparent enough about what it's doing. And I think a lot of it harvests information and tracks children, and parents aren't aware of it. And I want more transparency on what's being spent on this stuff and where is the proof that it's a healthy and effective way to learn.
Just to put the counter-argument, because some might say, look, using some of these apps and programmes is a really helpful tool for teachers to use, particularly if they're overworked, they've got to do loads of marking. It helps free up their time to spend it more effectively with the children.
I'm completely pro-teacher tech aids, like no more marking is genius, it's brilliant. It's when it impacts the pupil, that's why I say moderation is key. When it impacts the learner, I have a problem with it. When it helps the teacher, brilliant. But I know of a lot of teachers who love commanding a classroom, charismatic, passionate teachers who are very upset to have to go down this digital route and dehumanise the teaching process. And a lot of great slightly older teachers are leaving the profession. And when we have a problem with teacher recruitment, that's terrible.
I read something that you said previously through your work at a charity called School Home Support, where you were visiting a lot of schools, and something that you said really struck me when you said that you saw children who were distracted in classrooms but silent in the playground. So I just wondered if I could ask you what was that like? What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, in schools where they had one-to-one devices, the children weren't really focusing on their set tasks or listening to the teacher. They were some of them were finding ways around what they were meant to be learning. Some of them were zoned out. It was impossible for the teacher to tell who was gripped and who was absolutely somewhere else mentally. So they weren't focusing on what they were being taught. And in break time, they were on their phones. They weren't talking to each other. And usually playgrounds were a sort of deafening, sweet jungle of excitement and interaction. And instead, these children were completely isolated on their screens.
And do you think that's because they're just losing those interpersonal skills?
Yeah, I do.
You also lived in California, and you said that over there, the tech bosses keep their own kids away from this stuff.
It's really funny. It's something I've discussed with Jonathan Haidt, who I'm working quite a lot with now, which is a joy. Lots of people who design this stuff that we're buying over here don't let their own children anywhere near it. And they send them to schools like the Waldorf School of the Peninsula, which is pretty much tech-free. And these are huge Silicon Valley beasts deciding not to go down that route for their own children. And all the tech giants we've heard of were very sceptical about it for their own children. Steve Jobs didn't let his children use iPads. Bill Gates has said he's gone on record as saying devices have a lousy record in the classroom. There are all these little hypocrisies going on, which I think people need to be aware of.
I mean, it's the kind of thing that you can imagine making some parents feel quite angry, that they've developed this tech, but it's fine for other kids to use it, but not their own.
Well, in some ways, yes. In some ways, they're businessmen, and it's up to our governments and educators to say, prove this stuff is better than a paper and pen, and sure, we'll go for it. But it's not.
What do you think governments should do? What are you calling on governments to do?
I'd like governments to be very honest about what's going on here, because the contagion of tech in such young key stage areas is not working, and it's really damaging children. I want to know why primary schools, there's YouTube story time instead of a teacher telling kids a story. I want to know why there's so much continuous screen use in secondary school. I just want a bit of honesty. Is there a financial incentive going on? Why are we allowing a huge company to take all our GCSEs online by 2030 when I don't think most of the board of a particular company, I can't say which because I'll get into trouble, I don't think any of them are educators. So this seems like a big old business rather than something that's good for the children. Someone in America described EdTech as big tech in a school uniform. And I just want more of a spotlight on it, and I want more honesty.
There's also been calls to ban social media for under 16s, or even to ban smartphones for under 16s. Is that something you'd support?
Yeah, I would support it. I don't think there's any upsides at all for social media for young people. I think it makes them wretched. I don't think smartphones are healthy. I think if you want to get in touch with someone, you could text and call them on an old-fashioned sort of flip phone. I'm very supportive of that. That argument is being waged very powerfully now, and I'm very happy about it. But I think we need to start looking at EdTech.
Yeah, that's clearly the thing that you're really focusing on. Just more widely, look, these issues and these questions are something that all parents are grappling with, including myself. I remember, Liz Truss, the former PM, saying that she used to kind of make everyone in her house lock their smartphones in a box overnight, so she banned them from bedrooms.
Yeah.
Do you have any kind of rules that you try to follow?
Well, it's really hard. I did a talk last week with Hugh Grant, is very on side about this, and Jonathan Haidt, and Hugh and I feel exactly the same about these things. And they're terribly addictive machines. And if your school gives your child an iPad or a Chromebook to learn on, they've taken all power away from you, all agency away from you, and the kids find screens more exciting than anything else. So it's a battle I wage all the time. It's a battle tons of parents are going through, and I want government and I think NHS support.
Do you battle with it yourself? Are you addicted to your phone? I'm addicted to mine, I'll be honest.
Yeah, I am. And I'm not on any social media at all, and I'm still... And when you sort of think you've lost your phone, I really resent the fact that I nearly have a full-on heart attack.
Yeah. Where is it?
I can't bear that. Why am I so dependent on this wretched machine?
I know.
I just want us all to step back and say, these things are controlling us. It's not the other way around.
It's like the doom scrolling as well. I kind of sit on the sofa, I'm like, I'm just going to browse this, then it's like half an hour later, I'm like, oh, that's just gone, that time.
Gone.
I'm never going to get it back.
Exactly, and it's very important for children because they really won't get that time back.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very true. You speak a lot about children finding joy outside, whether it is, you know, playing outside, chasing the ball, playing sport, all of those kind of things, or reading books. You know, I'm someone who's very passionate about books. It's always something that I've enjoyed over my life. And I just wondered, is there anything that you would, fall on as, as a parent that you've seen that brings kind of joy to your family?
Being outdoors is good for children, but even being indoors, it's better to look at a wall than it is to look at an iPad. It's better to draw a picture, or everything you can do apart from being on a screen is free. It's writing a little story, it's reading a book, it's kicking a football around. I mean, all the wholesome things a child can do, none of them cost anything. So it's not like it's a sort of nasty equity issue. It's not. It's a sort of completely apolitical child welfare rallying cry that I want all parents to know that giving their child an iPad, I've made the mistake, all of us have, is like giving them a drug where nothing else will suffice. Once they've seen that thing, nothing else creative or calm is interesting.
It's been fascinating to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Right, let's speak, shall we, to Tom and Kwejo about this. Kwejo, I'm interested to get your thoughts. Do you agree with what Sophie was saying, some of it, all of it?
Yeah, I think there's two sides to this argument, and I've worked in a school before. I think it could benefit schools, teachers, students, especially around personalised learning, increased accessibility for those with disabilities or learning difficulties, language barriers. It could really help staff, schools, teachers get over some of these hurdles. But it depends on how it is implemented in classrooms, because will kids become too dependent on that technology? I know for me as an adult, if I need to do maths, I'm picking up my phone and I'm using my calculator. If I need to get somewhere, I'm using maps. You've now got apps where I could put an exam question in there and it will write me out a full answer in seconds that I could submit as my own work. And that's when technology becomes a problem, I think, in schools. And does it risk sort of breeding academic laziness? So that's where it runs the risk. Having said that, I think it could be used for positive change within schools that would benefit staff and students too.
Like the sort of things where you can help teachers just do a load of marking quickly.
Yeah, exactly. Streamline some of these processes that put a lot of demand on staff at the moment and schools.
What's your take on it?
Well, look, we all learn differently, right? I personally quite like spending time talking issues through face-to-face with people, and that was definitely the case when I was in government. I enjoyed sitting down with officials, talking about a problem and having that real interactivity. But I can see advantages, particularly for teachers, in terms of getting through marking. But to me, a good lesson for life is that everything should be in moderation. And so this brings questions really around when you introduce this, the frequency with which you introduce this. I think fundamentally, we've got to let children be children, and I do worry about that. I think that things like safeguarding, things like online harms, we need to have that awareness. So introducing technology at the right time has a really important role to play. But what we also have to avoid, I think, as a society, is a generation being very inward-facing and not having some of those really basic people skills that are so important for a really healthy and prolonged active life in communities across the country.
Yeah, that's what worries me, actually, to be honest, is the kind of mental health aspect of this and the kind of anxiety that I feel like a lot of people feel who are constantly on social media or constantly on their phone. You know, childhood and, teenagerhood is about taking risks, right, and making mistakes and everyone forgetting about them a few years later. And I just feel that maybe we have a generation that are more anxious about doing things, more well-behaved, so maybe better than the oldies like me who were like, in the pub or whatever. But But I don't know, it's that kind of anxiety and mental health I worry about.
Yeah, no, it's true, and I think that is a worry, and I think what schools have to focus on, especially when talking about introducing even more technology and artificial intelligence into schools. We know that kids are addicted to their phones. Us as adults, we're all addicted to our phones and social media and apps too. But is that going to be detrimental to the education and quality of a child's education if we're to even further that in schools?
Is there a regulation issue here? Does it need to go further, do you think?
I think there needs to be some commonality around expectations and standards, and I'm sure that as this really develops, it'll be something that government will want to have a handle on, because you do need to have a common approach to, for example, at what point is it appropriate to introduce some of these technologies? How often should they be being used? And, you know, teachers want to teach, in my experience. I was really lucky. I went to a comprehensive school, had brilliant, inspiring teachers, and they did a lot of that teaching with very traditional methods, and I got a lot out of that. But that's not to say that the next generation can enhance their learning through drawing on this tech, but it's about this point of moderation, I think.
Thanks, both. Really interesting. Still to come on the Politics Hub. Taken over the Sky News Daily podcast to discuss with Gabriel Pogram, the co-author of the hot new book all about the Labour Party, what and who really is Downing Street Chief of Staff Morgan McSweeney, who some say is a real power player in zone number 10.
Coming up on the UK Tonight is 8 o'clock, easier than buying paracetamol. That's a senior police officer's assessment of knife sales to children. As the government unveils its latest plans for a clampdown, I'll be joined in the studio by anti-knife campaigner Mark Prince. Also ahead, we'll go live to the village of Godstone in Surrey, where some residents have been forced to evacuate due to that massive sinkhole, and they've reportedly been told their homes are now at risk. We'll also be discussing those troubling scenes in Dubai, where Emma Raducanu was left in tears by the behaviour of a man in the crowd. All that and more on the UK Tonight at 8 o'clock.
Sunday, the Premier League is exclusively on Peacock. The league's most dynamic scorers square off. Goal for Haaland! Erling Haaland and Man City. It's a fantastic goal! Mo Salah and Liverpool. Time after time, here's Liverpool shining lights. This is the Premier League. That's just stunning! Sunday, only on Peacock.
I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles. Sky News, the full story first.
I'm Martin Brunt and I'm Sky's crime correspondent.
I'm David Blevins and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. I've spent 30 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
Free wherever you get your news. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
We start with breaking news.
I am Anna Botting.
It's been quite some day.
The golden age of America begins right now.
A long-awaited ceasefire is now underway.
First question, Sky News.
Congratulations, this is a huge moment.
Describe this feeling, it's incredible.
Now to California.
The Democratic mayor of Los Angeles cut the fire department budget. Do you owe citizens an apology? Have you nothing to say today?
Jane Secker, Sky News. Would you like to respond to us now?
I've never seen anything like this.
Beth, Rigby, Sky News.
In principle, would you agree to do that?
Criticism of you, the president, is banned. How is this a fair election?
Historic day here today.
The cameras are poised here, there, everywhere, waiting to see what the president might do next. I gave you the A+ treatment. Thank you. Thank you all.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Hello, welcome back. Well, earlier today, I ended up taking over a bit of podcasting. I subbed in for Neil Patterson on Sky News Daily. Now, the main discussion was about Keir Starmer's transatlantic diplomacy, but it's Since I don't get to do the podcast very often, I allowed myself to indulge myself with a deep dive into the man some believe is the real power behind the throne, Morgan McSweeney. Now, he's a red-haired Irishman who is the chief of staff to Keir Starmer, rumoured to be his ideological heartbeat. I was speaking to Gabriel Pogrund of the Sunday Times, who's written a book on Keir Starmer, knows more than almost anyone about what's really going on in Number 10. Is your sense the case that it is Morgan McSweeney who is the ideological driving force of this government, or is it Keir Starmer?
It is the political question of the moment, and I think my straight answer is I think that McSweeney does have a much more natural sense of who Labour should be for and how to demonstrate that politically. But I think the question of once you're in, what you then do, I mean, I think that is the question mark still hovering over the government, and I'm not sure McSweeney should have an answer. You know, it's sort of maybe a category error to say he should. Why should he? He's a local government guy who Starmer entrusted to win him an election, not to unleash then a governing philosophy and a whole policy programme upon getting into Number 10. That was a woman called Sue Gray's responsibility, supposedly. So, you know, whether that should be McSweeney's remit is its own question. But Starmer, you know, neither man appears to have a full-bodied and detailed policy programme, and I think that's why the government's had quite a tricky start.
It's interesting, isn't it? And the other thing about McSweeney is that, I mean, you mentioned it earlier in the podcast, there's been all these kind of talk about these briefing wars going on. Is there a boys' club that's briefing against female ministers? Was it Morgan McSweeney who ousted Sue Gray? What's your take on all of that?
So I think that there's definitely one of the sort of through lines of the 2019 to 2024 period is there was often an internal enemy within Starmer's Labour. At first it was the Corbynites, then then Corbyn was humiliated and suspended and lots of his followers left the party. Thereafter, in McSweeney's eyes, it became the librarian Labour brigade. People who were, you know, nice, soft left, happy having got rid of Corbyn to leave it there, but weren't prepared to go for the kill politically and doing even more to disavow the left and their legacy. We went from Corbyn to librarian Labour. Then there was Chief of Staff, Sam White, who, you know, ultimately Starmer replaced for a year with nobody. The Chief of Staff role laid vacant for a year. Then Sue Gray came to fill it, and she became the bête noire of, if not McSweeney himself, a lot of the people around him. I've often felt that, you know, that the question of what happens when this iteration of Number 10 suffers its real difficulty is really fascinating, because this is McSweeney's operation now. And I think that Starmer's always been happy to devolve the politics to the Irishman and to, in the end, side with him and his judgment on those questions like the divide which did exist at the heart of Downing Street for the first few months. What happens in this instance? I mean, some people say, well, that's the point where Starmer himself gets the sack, but you know, rather than McSweeney. But no, there's no doubt that there has often been a sort of toxicity within Starmer's leader's office, and at times there's a bit of displacement activity as well, because Starmer himself can be quite agonising and deliberative in the way that he does things. You know, he makes decisions, people say ruthlessly, but often quite belatedly. Doesn't feel politics that much.
If you scan the QR code on your screen right now, you can listen to the latest episode of the Sky News Daily Podcast. Right, let's chat again to Tom and Quojo, shall we? Tom, you know, Morgan McSweeney, Dominic Cummings, there's always so much focus on chiefs of staffs, but is there truth in the fact that sometimes it is the guy in the back room, and it often is a guy, you know, driving the ideology?
It's a massive role, because there's just so much to be done. Every day there are challenges, there are crises, there are pressures, and there's just that day-to-day work where there has to be leadership, and the Prime Minister can't be on top of all of that. I think what's really interesting is that one of the observations that I would have is that The government is finding it harder than I think they ever envisaged, this governing business, and it isn't so easy after all, is it? But also, I think when you compare Keir Starmer to many other prime ministers of times gone by, there doesn't seem to be this kind of guiding star set of principles that they're working towards. And maybe that's something that will come in the fullness of time. But it is a really tricky endeavour running the country, and the Chief of Staff has a massive role to play.
That guiding star that Tom was talking about, what would you like to see Keir Starmer focus on a bit more, you think?
Oh, well, I think issues...
Just throw you a curveball,
yeah,
go on.
Yeah. Well, I think the sort of... there's loads, I'll be here all evening. I think the issues...
You've only got a minute. So.
I know. The issues that are most pressing and people care about the most, I mean, they've mentioned fixing our foundations. They have to make sure they absolutely deliver on that. I mean, that's our housing, that's our NHS, social services, you name it. I want him to stay true to that and absolutely deliver on that.
And do you think there's a truth, do you think, in the fact that the government hasn't really found its kind of ideological footing yet?
I mean, some would say they're pretty new in still, but they're going to have to find that footing, I think, and find it quite fast, because people will soon become, I think, impatient if they don't.
It's very fair. Thanks,
you need
Beth.
a compelling story in modern politics, don't you?
Yeah, that's true, particularly because it does feel like it's kind of politics and fast forward at the minute. Great to speak to both of you this evening. Thanks for being on the panel. That's it from us tonight. I'll see you tomorrow at 7 p.m. Up next, though, it is the UK Tonight with Matt Barbette, and then you've got The World with Yad Hakeem at 9 p.m. But that's it from us, and I'll see you tomorrow at 7 p.m.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem. Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here? You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.